Now, story points are a different way of estimating. It's very abstract. Now, again, you don't have to use this, but I would suggest you will get better if you do use story points. Now, story points are not based on time. I'm going to say that a number of times. They are instead based on size and complexity. Relative unit of measure, a relative estimate based on other things that we've done in the past. So you're basically doing a comparison of this compared to that. Is this bigger, smaller, or same size? That's essentially what you're doing. We're going to go through an example of this in a little bit. Now, the other value of this is that you can triangulate. If you have multiple things that you've done in the past or multiple baseline stories, you can triangulate. So if you take something that's small, something that maybe is in the middle, and something maybe that's large, any new work that comes in, you can compare it to those baselines and say, well, it's a little bigger than this, but smaller than that. And it's smaller than this, but bigger than that. So you can kind of triangulate across multiple data points to get more accurate estimates. And the more data points you have, or the more baseline stories you have, the better you can get at estimating, because you're not thinking about how long it's going to take. You're instead saying, how is it compared to the other things I've done before? So the more historical data you have, the better your estimates get, and you'll see the improvement in your estimates over time. Now, just like any exercise or any new thing that you're learning, when you first do this, your team is going to be bad at this. That's perfectly normal, but they get better and better over time. Now, the good thing is your estimates when you first start out doing it this way will be no worse than they were when you were doing it with waterfall and time. They're guesses, right? Maybe educated guesses, but they're still guesses. So they're still guessing at the beginning, but over time they get more and more data points, and it gets better and better. Now let's go through an analogy to show how this works of size and complexity. So let's picture ourselves in a room. The room is a simple rectangle, meaning there are two small walls and two larger walls that are twice the size of the two small walls. Okay, simple rectangle. Now in this first part of this example, there are no windows or doors and no complexity at all, just simple walls. Now, if somebody asks me to paint this room that I'm in, I'm going to take a look at the small wall, and then based on my subject matter experience of having painted many rooms before, having moved many times, I'm going to look at the first small wall, and I'm going to say, well, it's a relatively simple, it's a light color, easy, it's not going to require a lot of coats, a little bit of taping, a little bit of cut-in, pretty simple to do. So this wall is going to take me 2 hours to paint. Now, if I'm using relative estimating using time, since I said 2 hours, that first wall is going to take 2 hours. The other wall that is the same size is also going to take me 2 hours. Now, the two bigger walls that are twice the size are going to take me 4 hours each, right? So it's relative estimating using that first baseline story, okay? Now, here's a problem, though. I use time as my unit of measure. So what happens if my first estimate was wrong? Now I have to re-estimate my entire backlog. All the items need to be re-estimated. Now personally, I find estimating to be an incredible waste of time. Yes, I said that. Estimating is a waste of time. All right? The only people that really get value out of estimating are those people that need it for forecasting purposes. The value that we get of estimating in an agile world is not the number, but the process of estimating, because we're going to be talking and learning about the work. So there's huge value in understanding the work, not a lot of value in coming up with just a number. Lots of different ways of estimating, and one way that we estimate in Agile, this is not for the light of heart, not for the beginners. There's actually a way of estimating in Agile where you don't estimate at all. You don't come up with the numbers. You gain the numbers. You derive the numbers. And we'll talk about that very briefly as well. But I don't want to get you too nervous yet. We still come up with estimates, and we can still give deadlines. We can still give dates. So as I said, now I've given these estimates, but if my baseline's wrong, everything is wrong. So I don't want to have to re-estimate everything. It's a waste of my time. So instead of calling that first wall 2 hours, I'm going to call it a 1. Now, 1 does not represent 2 hours. It doesn't represent the complexity of the work or anything like that. It just represents 1. It's just a small wall. So I just call it a 1. Now, the other wall that's the same size and same complexity is also going to be called a 1. So because it's a relative unit of measurement based on the size and complexity of the work. Same size, same complexity, same number. Now the other 2 walls that are twice the size and the same complexity again, I'm going to call those 2s because they're twice the size and same complexity. Now, that means if the first wall takes me an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, it's still a 1. That size, that story point size will never change, but what changes is the amount of time it takes to get that done. Now, we factor that in. I'll show you how that works in just a little bit. I'm going to show you a really cool chart for forecasting purposes. The amount of time that it takes to do the work is variable, but the estimate of the work based on its size complexity stays consistent. Now, the value that we get out of this, again, we get more accurate estimates. We get to learn over time. We get historical data. The estimate is just a relative unit. It's not based on my experience. It's based on the whole team's experience. And estimating, by the way, is a team sport. It's not an individual sport. The team gives the estimates, not a team lead, not a manager. The team doing the work gives the estimate. And that's for obvious reasons, right? It may seem inefficient to have the team estimate, but you get more accurate estimates as a result, okay? All right, so we're not done with the analogy. Let's say that we add in some complexity. Let's add a door into one of those small walls. Well, that's more complex. Now I've got more taping, more cut-in, so it's a more complex situation. So I'm instead of calling that small wall a 1, I'm going to call it a 2 because it's just slightly more complex. It's a little more difficult than it was when we first started. So that's how it works. It's a relative estimate using story points. Pretty simple.